الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم اللهم افتح علينا فتوح العارفين ووفقنا توفيق الصالحين وانفعنا بالقرآن والذكر الحكيم اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا بما ينفعنا وزدنا علما يقربنا منك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت يا حي يا قيوم تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا سهلا اللهم أعذنا من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا واصلح لنا شأننا كله لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم وبعد فقال المؤلف الإمام الرازي رحمه الله ونفعنا به وبكم. So we're still on the section where Fakhruddin al-Razi rahimahullah is going into an extensive discussion into the miracles of the awliya, So Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi rahimahullah, his position is that of the majority of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, that the miracles are possible at the hands of awliya. So in other words, they're possible at the hands of people that are not prophets. So the extensive investigation here is to prove that point. So he started off by giving us proofs from the Quran, then proofs from hadith of what happened to some of the Sahaba, or some of the hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ mentioned stories of previous people and some things that happened to them, like the 3 people who were in the cave, etc. And from the Quran you have the obvious one is Maryam alayhi salam, who was not a prophet, but many miracles in the Quran are mentioned about her. And you have about Ashabul Kahf is the other one as well. That's in the Quran. Okay, so that's where we got to, and then okay, yeah, I think we got down to here. So the last narration that we mentioned was about the man who had the cow which spoke to him, and said to him, I wasn't made to be carrying these big loads, remember. So the next one is and we also mentioned the next one, which was the story about narrated in the hadith about the man who heard the voice coming from the thunderclouds, that we're going to water the land of so and so. So that was also another example. Yeah. Okay. So that's the one where we got up to. So it says next, وَأَمَّا الْآثَارِ. So those were the hadith. So the Quran, that now he's finished mentioning some of the hadith which talk about miracles that happen at those people. So it says next, أَمَّا الْآثَارِ. So athar is the plural of athar, and here it has the meaning of narrations which are not hadith, meaning from the Prophet ﷺ. So these are from Sahaba, and can be from after, and these terms can be used interchangeably as well. Athar and hadith in amongst the early people, they were used interchangeably, but later on the mustalahat, it developed, the technical vocabulary of the hadith specialist is now, how we take it now is hadith is specifically something that's for the Prophet ﷺ, And athar or athar, these type of things are for those like Sahaba or Tabi'een, etc. So Imam al-Razi is from a later scholars when all of these technical terms were fully developed, so he's using them in that sense. فلنبدأ بما نقل أنه ظهر عن الخلفاء الراشدين من الكرامات. So he says we will begin with what has been transmitted, that karamat that happened at the hands of the Khulafa al-Rashidin. Yeah, the Khulafa al-Rashidin, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali and Sayyidina al-Hasan. ثم بما ظهر عن سائر الصحابة, and then we'll move on to some of the things that were narrated about other Sahaba. أما أبو بكر رضي الله عنه فمن كراماته أنه لما حملت جنازته إلى باب قبر النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. Says one of the karamat that is mentioned about Abu Bakr رضي الله عنه is that when his janaza was carried to the door of the grave of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, because he's buried next to the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, ونودي السلام عليك يا رسول الله هذا أبو بكر بالباب, فإذا الباب قد انفتح وإذا بهاتف يهتف من القبر. So when they brought his body to the grave, to coming to the grave of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, they said, the people bringing him said, they called out, Assalamu alayka ya Rasulullah. This is Abu Bakr at the door. And they said, the door opened by itself. The door opened by itself, and they heard a voice from the qabr coming, or from the direction of the grave coming, saying, Udkhulul Habib ila al-Habib. Bring the beloved to the beloved. So that's, he just mentions one, because actually there's many things narrated about Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, so he just mentions one. وأما عمر رضي الله عنه فقد ظهرت أنواع كثيرة من كراماته. He says, as for Umar radiallahu anhu, he says many karamat are narrated and manifested during his time. وأحدها ما روي أنه بعث جيشا وأمر عليهم رجلا يدعى سارية من ابن الحسين. So one of the famous narrations about him, which happened when he was Khalifa, he once sent out an army, and the head of the army he put this man called Sariya ibn al-Husayn. Yeah, Sariya. فبين عمر يوم الجمعة فيخطب جعل يصيح في خطبته وهو على منبر يا سارية الجبل الجبل. One day, so he sent the army is gone, and one day Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, who's in Medina, he's giving khutbah, and all of a sudden in the middle of the khutbah he shouts out, O Sariya, the mountain, the mountain. He shouts out in the middle of the khutbah, all unexpectedly, and then just carries on with the khutbah. The Sahaba who are there, they're surprised. They don't really understand why he suddenly done that in the middle of the khutbah. But obviously they don't interrupt the khutbah, because it's not permissible to speak during khutbah. But afterwards, قال علي بن أبي طالب كرم الله وجهه فكتبت تاريخ تلك الكلمة. Afterwards they asked him, in another narration has added more details, after the khutbah they asked him, and Sayyidina Ali Karamallah was one of them there as well. They asked him, Umar, what happened? You were giving a khutbah like normal, and in the middle of it you start shouting Sariya, oh Sariya, the mountain, the mountain. And he said, I don't know, except that I saw the army, which Sariya was leading, and they were fighting against the enemy, and they were about to be defeated, and I was shouting to them to go to the mountain, to retreat to the mountain, and as the strategy that he wanted them to take. So he said, I just shouted out, and then that's all I know. And it says that Sayyidina Ali noted down for himself the date of that, when this happened, the actual day that this happened. فقدم رسول مقدم الجيش فقال يا أمير المؤمنين غزونا يوم الجمعة. Sometime later on, the army was returning, and one of the people at the sort of messenger, he came first to Medina to inform them that they had been victorious. And he said, "O Amir al-Mu'mineen, we were in the battle on the day of Jum'ah, في وقت الخطبة, at the same time as the khutbah normally takes place. فهزمونا, they were about to defeat us. فإذا بإنسان يصيح يا سارة الجبل الجبل." And then we heard a voice shouting, "O Sariya, go to the mountain, the mountain." So we detoured towards the mountain. And then we were victorious by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَأَسْنَدْنَا ظُهُورَنَا إِلَى الْجَبَلِ. Literally we put our backs towards the mountain, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala defeated the kuffar, the disbelievers. وَظَفِرْنَا بِالْغَنَائِمِ وَالْعَظِيمَ. We got a huge amount of booty. بِبَرَكَةِ ذَلِكَ الصَّوْتِ. By the barakah of that voice that we had heard. So that was, one of the miracles that's narrated for Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. قلت سمعت بعض المذكورين قال كان ذلك معجزة لمحمد صلى الله عليه وسلم لأنه قال لأبي بكر وعمر أنتما مني بمنزلة السمع والبصر. Fakhruddin Razi adds a nice point here. He says, I heard someone mention that this was actually one of the mu'jiza of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this event. Why? Because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is narrated to have said that Abu Bakr and Umar, you both are to me like my hearing and my sight. Like my hearing and my sight. فلما كان عمر بمنزلة البصر لمحمد صلى الله عليه وسلم لا جرم قدر على أن يرى من ذلك البعد العظيم. So he said Sayyidina Umar is like the sight, you're like my sight and he's like my hearing. So if Sayyidina Umar is on the rank of the sight of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then this explains why he was able to see such a great distance away. الثاني روي أن نيل مصر كان في الجاهلية يقف في كل سنة مرة واحدة وكان لا يجري حتى يلقى فيه جارية واحدة حسناء. So the second one, which is also a famous event that happened at the time of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, during his Khilafah, the Muslims, they took over Egypt, which was a huge victory for the Muslims, because Egypt was an ancient land, very famous ancient land of pharaohs, and then at that time when the Muslims took it, it was under the Roman Empire, but it's one of the richest lands of ancient times, Egypt, and one of the main reasons why it's such a rich and productive land is because of that river that is in it, the Nile, or the Nile as it's called in English, which is the largest river in the world. And the Prophet ﷺ said, this river is one of the rivers of Jannah. One of the 4 rivers, 2 that are in this world, is one of them, was the Nile. So, but when the Muslims, they took Egypt under the Sahaba, one of the things they found, the people there, they had this custom every year. They used to make a sacrifice to the river Nile. And that sacrifice was a virgin girl, one of noble descent and one of beauty. And they used to sacrifice her by throwing her into the river. And they said that this is what makes the Nile flow, otherwise it would dry up. That we have to do this as a sacrifice. فلما جاء الإسلام كتب عمرو بن العاص بهذا الواقع إلى عمر. So when the Sahaba heard about this, and because the people of Egypt, they said to them, look, we have to do this, it's a time of year, we have to sacrifice, otherwise there'll be a drought and everything. So Amr ibn al-As, he wrote to Sayyidina Umar. Amr ibn al-As is the governor in Egypt. He wrote to Sayyidina Umar in Medina, that look, this is what the people here are saying, this is what they do, what do you advise? Yeah. فكتب عمر على خزفة أيها النيل. Actually, he's just summarized, but in the full narration it mentions that Amr ibn al-As, he prevented the people there from throwing in the girl. He said this can't happen under Islam. Before he wrote to Sayyidina Umar, he said this can't happen under Islam. And so they didn't throw in the thing, but then the river started drying up and they started getting drought, so there, then the Muslims were a bit confused, and so Amr ibn al-As then wrote to Sayyidina Umar, say, this is what happened, what do you advise? We stopped this, but this is what's happening. So then Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, he sent back to Amr ibn al-As on a piece of parchment or whatever they used to use. It says khirqa, like a cloth, they used to write on in those days, but they didn't have paper. Paper came to the Muslims through the Chinese later on. It was the Chinese who, they invented paper. Well, actually, historically in Egypt they used to have paper in there as well. But anyway, so Sayyidina Umar, he wrote on a piece of cloth, أيها النيل إن كنت تجري بأمر الله فجري. He wrote in there, O River Nile, if you used to flow by the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then flow. وإن كنت تجري بأمرك فلا حاجة بنا إليك. And if you flow by your own command or your own affair, then we have no need of you. فألقيت تلك الخرقة الخزفة في النيل فجرى ولم يقف بعد ذلك. So they threw that letter of Sayyidina Umar into the river, and the river started flowing abundantly after that. And they never had that problem following that time. الثالث وقعت الزلزلة في المدينة وضرب عمر الدرة على الأرض وقال اسكني بإذن الله فسكنت. It's narrated that once there was a zalzala, an earthquake in Medina, and Sayyidina Umar struck the ground with his stick, and he said, Uskuni bi'idhnillah, he said, be still with the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the earth went still. وَمَا حَدَثَتِ الزَّلْزَلَةُ بِالْمَدِينَةِ بَعْدَ ذَلك. And after that we never heard of a earthquake in Medina. الرابع وقعت النار في بعض دور المدينة. The fourth narration from Sayyidina Umar, once there was a fire in one of the houses in Medina, or some of the houses in Medina. فكتب عمر على خزيفة يا نار أسكني بإذن الله فألقوها في النار فانتفعت في الحال. Sayyidina Umar once again wrote on a piece of cloth, O fire, be stilled by the permission of Allah. And when this was thrown into the fire, it went out. So all of these are narrated from time of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu for 10 years when he was a Khalifa. Okay, الخامس روي أن رسول ملك الروم جاء إلى عمر. It's also narrated that once a delegation or a messenger came, envoy from the Roman emperor to see Umar, who was the Khalifa. فطلب داره فظنه داره مثل قصور الملوك. when he came to Medina, he was looking for like a huge palace, because he was thinking, you know, I've come to the Medina, where is the leader of these people who have been conquering all our lands, you know, and have completely taken over the Persian Empire. This must be a great king living in a huge palace. So he was coming, looking around for some huge palace which he couldn't see. Yeah. فقالوا ليس له ذلك. He asked people around, where's the palace of your king, your Khalifa, you know, and they said he doesn't have that type of, he doesn't have that. وإنما هو في الصحراء يضرب اللبن. They said, no, he's out there in the desert, or, you know, in the open space, just getting some milk. فلما ذهب إلى الصحراء رأى عمر رضي الله عنه وضع درته تحت رأسه ونام على التراب. So the man was quite surprised. He doesn't have a palace. Who is this, you know, great king? He went to the direction where they had indicated to him, and he saw Sayyidina Umar just lying down upon his staff under his head and sleeping upon the earth, you know, directly upon the earth, not even with a mat or anything. فعجب الرسول من ذلك. He was just completely amazed, you know, that this, you know, what sort of people are these? وقال إن أهل الشرق والغرب يخافون من هذا الإنسان وهو على هذا الصفة هذه الصفة. He said to himself, you know, the people of the east and the west are living in fear of this man, and look at what sort of state he's in. ثم قال في نفسه إني وجدته خاليا فأقتله وأخرس الناس منه. He said, look, and then he thought to himself, he's all alone. I found him. He's all alone, just lying down on the ground. I could kill him and rid all of the people of him, you know, because he's conquering all of the east and the west. فلما وقع السيف فلما رفع السيف أخرج الله من الأرض أسادين. When he lifted up the sword to go towards Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent two serpents out of the ground, out of the earth. No, sorry, two lions, Asadain. Two lions came forward. فَقَصَدَاهُ فَخَافَ. And they came towards him. Two lions start approaching him. In the desert in those days in Arabia, there were wild lions used to live in the desert in those times. I think they still might do, actually. I'm not sure if they still do. فَخَافَ وَأَلْقَى السَّيْفَ مِنْ يَدِهِ. So the man became very scared and dropped the sword from his hand. وَانْتَبَهَ Umar. So Umar then noticed, you know, realized what was going on when he dropped the sword. وَلَمْ يَرَ شَيْئًا فَسَأَلُوا عَنِ الْحَالِ فَذَكَرَ لَهُ الْوَاقِعَ وَأَسْلَمَ. Sayyidina Umar, you know, sort of woke up. He looked around. He couldn't see anything except for this man. And he asked him what happened, and the man told him what happened, and the man became Muslim. وَأَقُولُ هَذِهِ الْوَقَائِعِ رُوِيَتْ بِالْآحَادِ. So these are several of the miracles that happened at the time of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu that have been narrated. وها هنا ما هو معلوم بتواتر. So then Fakhruddin al-Razi rahimahullah, he makes an additional point. He says, look, another thing I would like to add here. He says, these incidents we have mentioned with Sayyidina Umar, these have been narrated by ahad, meaning chains of narrators, but not what we call mutawatir, which means, you know, either 10 or more people witnessed them and narrated them through 10 or more chains. Yeah, so the difference between ahad and mutawatir is in our aqidah, or in our usul, what our scholars mention, which is very amazing, that with ahad narrations, which means basically either one person witnessed the event, or two or three, it can be any number, but less than 10, you could say. Most said less than 10, although You know, you can imagine there's difference of opinion. Some said 5, some said 10. So what makes it certain, you know? With ahad, even if the witness is a reliable witness and a truthful witness, and the chain of narrators has come through reliable people who are pious, God-fearing, and good memory, etc., there's still a very tiny fraction of doubt can remain in these type of narrations. They don't get to the level of 100% certainty. Yeah. So many of the hadith which we call sahih come under this category. Yeah. So, for example, in Bukhari, Muslim, other books, the hadith which are of very strong chain of narrators, but still they are ahad. Yeah. The one that gives you absolute certainty, which you can say there's no doubt in it whatsoever, is when it comes to the level of tawatur. When it comes to the level of tawatur, it means it's been witnessed or it has been related to you by so many different sources, and those sources could not have collaborated together to deceive you. There's also that put in as well, because sometimes you might get something from multiple sources, but they're actually getting together to try to deceive you. So also that cannot be a possibility. Then we can have 100% certainty. So it gets to the level of what we call qat'i, definitive proof. So that's not to say that the ahad are unreliable. It's not to say that the ahad are unreliable. But this is just a very fine and a very excellent point that our scholars sort of developed, you know. It's what we call epistemology. Where's our source of knowledge? You know, it defines very clearly for us those things which we can have 100% certainty in, and those things which we can be very confident about if it's on the level of sahih. Yeah, but we can't have that same level of certainty. So, in other words, those things which we have to believe in our aqidah are those things which have come to us through tawatur, through that type of proof. Now, with the books, specifically with the books Bukhari and Muslim, there's an ikhtilaf. There are some ulama of Al-Sunnah who said that those books are different. Those books we have that certainty with. And they said we have to believe everything that is in those books. So there is some ikhtilaf on those two particular books. And the argument for that is two. One is that the hadith in those books are of a very strong nature, even though they are ahad. Those authors have specifically included hadith that are extremely strong, of the strongest of the sahih, you could say. Secondly, those two books have got like a consensus upon them. You know, the hadith that are in those books have developed a consensus amongst Ahl-Sunnah wal Jama'ah of acceptability. You know, even those few narrations in those books that have been debated about, overall the meaning of those hadith have developed a consensus about them, the truthfulness of them. So those are some of the arguments why those particular two books, some people have said you have to come to the level of belief in them. But leaving aside that particular debate, the point is, you know, I think this is a very important point. This difference between tawatur and ahad, especially for the age that we find ourselves in, because many other religions have been diminished or destroyed or put on the wayside because the content of them, of their books or whatever, you know, their tradition was not able to stand up to the onslaught of science and modern knowledge. You know, as knowledge has developed in the modern world with science and all of this stuff, things like Christianity, other religions, they were unable to withstand that. Yeah, Because there was stuff in there that was clearly being contradicted now by scientific, what we call scientific proofs or scientific fact, if there is such a thing. But with Islam, because we had this epistemology that our scholars had worked out many centuries ago, we know very clearly those things which are of tawatur, which are of certainty in our deen. And that is basically the Quran, the whole of the Quran is tawatur, and a certain number of hadiths which come to that level of mutawatir, which are, there's different approximations, but approximately several hundred in number only. Out of the thousands and thousands of hadiths that are out there, several hundred only are of that level of mutawatir. So those are the things we can say with 100% certainty have definitely come from the Prophet ﷺ, and nothing in any discoveries that scientists have made or anything have contradicted anything of that tawatur, that body of tawatur, the Quran and those hadiths. So that's why this was a really important work that our scholars did, to differentiate between the levels of evidences, levels of how certain we can be that this is from revelation or not. Start with tawatur, then you have the ahad, which is sahih, then you have hasan, da'if, and then the very weaker things, even weaker sources than that, like the Israeliyat, narrations that came into the Muslim tradition from Bani Israel, from the Jewish people that became Muslims and things like that. So they was all very carefully differentiated. So he says, Fakhruddin al-Razi rahimahullah, these particular narrations are mentioned from Sayyidina Umar through ahad. Yeah. So even though they may be strong and we can be very confident that these things took place, but they're not on the level of tawatur. وَهَا هُنَا مَا هُوَ مَعْلُومٌ بِالتَّوَاتُرِ. He said however there's thing we know about Sayyidina Umar through tawatur, definitive knowledge we have of him, which is no less a karama if you reflect upon it. وهو أنه مع بعده من عن زينة الدنيا واحترازه عن التكلفات وتهويلات سأس الشرق والغرب وقلب الممالك والدول. He says, just look at the man himself, how he was so far from all of these embellishments of the dunya and the love of the dunya. What an abstinent person he was. The way he lived and had none of these takallufat and tahwilat, He was such a straightforward person, not involved in all of these pomp and glamour and all of these love of the world and all of these things. And at the same time, he was commanding the east and the west. He was commanding the lands of the east and the west were under his command at that time. وَقَلَّبَ الْمَمَالِكَ وَالدُّوَلَ, and he overturned kingdoms and kings, were overturned under his authority. لو نظرت في كتب التواريخ علمت أنه لم يتفق لأحد من أول عهد آدم إلى الآن ما تيسر له. He said, if you look at history, look at historical facts and records, you will find in the whole history of Bani Adam, in the history of the human race, no one of this type of description. Yeah? Until now, he says, until now, from whatever we know of history, you'll find no one that has been given this type of tawfiq. And that's very true for people who read history and are interested in history. Read about kings and sultans and emperors and all of that, Read all of their biographies. You'll find no one like Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. Obviously not from prophets, not talking about prophets like Prophet Sulaiman, etc. Yeah. فإنه مع غاية بعده عن التكلفات كيف قدر على تلك السياسات. This person, he was so far from all of these takallufat, these type of extravagances and intricacies, yet he was able to rule over such a vast realm, do the siyasat, you know. ولا شك أن هذا من أعظم الكرامات. This is actually one of the greatest karamat, if you're going to talk about karamat. You know? وعم عثمان رضي الله عنه. So then he's going to go to Sayyidina Uthman رضي الله عنه as well. So this was the thing about Sayyidina Umar, you know, and if you look at the way he sent out the armies as well. This is one of the things that Western historians have commented upon in in bewilderment, you know. This person in Medina, you know, there's a small town, Medina, compared to the empires of Rome and Persia. Yet these guys are sending out their armies, and not just, you know, let's deal with one at a time. The army sent against both Persia and Rome at the same time. You know, despite that, you know, being such a small town in the middle of the nowhere in the desert, you know, you would expect, if anything, they send one, you know, deal with one of these empires first, you know, either Persia or Rome. So normally he sends one army towards Persia, one towards Rome. You know, that was the tawakkul, the pure tawakkul, and the certainty of the promise of the Prophet ﷺ is going to come about. You know, that the Muslims are going to be given this khilafah. And then also miraculous, if you think about it, the way that he removed Sayyidina Khalid ibn al-Walid. You know, because Sayyidina Khalid ibn al-Walid was made the general of the Muslim armies under Sayyidina Abu Bakr. You know, and he was the one who was responsible for getting victory after victory for the Muslims. You know, and sometimes when some of the other Muslim armies were suffering difficulties, he would be sent, and he would always get victory. So when Sayyidina Umar became Khalifa, one of the things he did, he sent a letter to Sayyidina Khalid saying, I'm deposing you of your command. Yeah? And Abu Ubaidah is put as commander, and Khalid ibn Walid just becomes a normal soldier. And that's a karama as well from Sayyidina Khalid, that he was able to do that. Shows his level of taqwa, you know, and his intention is for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because now Sayyidina Umar, and this was one of the wisdom why he did this, Sayyidina Umar, you know, he said he didn't want people to start thinking that the victory is through Khalid. You know? Because once the Muslims start believing the victory is through Sayyidina Khalid, maybe the victory will stop coming, because we have to rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that was the wisdom. So Sayyidina Khalid immediately stepped down. You know? So those are just karamat in themselves, you know, that having that level of tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Take a break, inshallah. Allahumma salli wa sallim barik ala sayyidina Muhammad. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. So then he's going to talk about Sayyidina Uthman next, radiallahu anhu. So he says, روى أنس رضي الله عنه قال سرت في الطريق فرفعت عيني إلى امرأة ثم دخلت على عثمان. So Anas mentioned, once I was going to see Sayyidina Uthman رضي الله عنه, who was, assuming at that time he was the Khalifa. On the way, I lifted my eyes and just glanced upon a woman, you know, meaning a woman that you know, is not mahram for him or anything, you know, a non-related woman. فقال ما لي أراكم تدخلون علي وآثار زنا ظاهرة عليكم. When he came to Sayyidina Uthman, Sayyidina Uthman said to him, what's this I see? You've come to me and the traces of zina are apparent upon you. The traces of zina are apparent upon you. فقلت أجاء الوحي بعد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. he said, so Anas, he made a very interesting statement. He said, is there revelation coming after the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? You know, so he's trying to understand how can Uthman know this. You know what I mean? Because obviously wahi, revelation is finished. فقال لا ولكن فراسة صادقة. He said no, it's not wahi or anything like that. It is simply farasa sadiqa, a correct intuition, you could say, you know, or a spiritual insight, like a truthful insight. So that's an example of, you know, obviously, you know, he had there some knowledge of an unseen nature, you know. This is narrated later on of someone, you know, a great alim of his name, Sayyidina Uthman Dan Fodio, you know, who lived in the 19th century in West Africa. A great alim and a great Shaykh. Is narrated he had a similar thing, that if people were committing sins, he would be able to tell what sins they had committed, you know, when they came to him. الثاني أنه لما طعن بالسيف فأول قطرة من دمه سقطت وقعت على المصحف. A second miracle narrated from Sayyidina Uthman, that when he was killed, you know, when he was killed, said when he was actually stabbed with the sword, the first drop of blood that fell from him landed upon the Mus'haf, the Quran that he was reading, upon the words فَسَيَكْفِيكَهُمُ اللَّهُ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ, upon the words that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will surely be enough for you against them, and He is the one who hears and sees and knows. الثالث أن جهجاه الغفاري انتزع العصا من يد عثمان وكسرها على ركبته فوقعت الآكلة في ركبته. It's narrated that one of the people that was criticizing Sayyidina Uthman and sort of, you know, going against him, this person, he was Jahjah al-Ghifari. This person grabbed the stick that Sayyidina Uthman was holding. You know, he was the Khalifa. He grabbed his stick from him and broke it upon his knee, his own knee. You know, he broke it. You know, just sort of, you know, obviously extremely bad way to deal with Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu. And then after he broke it on his knee, that knee was became infected and became afflicted with a very serious an akila is what you call like you know, like a wound which eats up your, you know, like becomes gangrenous basically. So he became afflicted with that on his leg. وأما علي كرم الله وجهه فيروى أن واحدا من محبيه سرق وكان عبدا أسود فأتي به إلى علي رضي الله عنه فقال له أسرقته. As for Sayyidina Ali رضي الله عنه, some of the things, many things are narrated from him as well. Some of them he's going to mention. One of them, he said, once one of his very close people that he loved very much stole, you know, sariqas. He was a slave, a black slave, the one who stole. And he was brought in front of Sayyidina Ali, and Sayyidina Ali said, have you stolen? He said, yes. فقطع يده فانصرف من عند علي عليه السلام فلقيه سلمان الفارسي وابن الكراء فقال ابن الكراء من قطع يدك فقال أمير المؤمنين. So Sayyidina Ali had his hand cut. Yeah. This is obviously from the justice of those people, that, you know, if something comes to them, even if it's someone they love or their own family, they will implement the hudud of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala no matter what. You know? Narrated in the time of the Prophet, you know, one of the Makhzumi women was caught stealing, and she was from the clan of Bani Makhzum, which is the most powerful clan of Quraysh at that time, the clan of Sayyidina Khalid ibn al-Walid and so on. A noble woman, and the Prophet ﷺ had ordered the hand to be cut. So they were coming to him saying, and they were sending people that were close to him saying, please, let her off, don't cut her hand. People were very, alarmed and everything. But the Prophet ﷺ insisted, and he said, even if Fatima stole, I would surely have cut her hand, So that's the hudud of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have no choice in them. Once it comes to the Qadi and it's established, he has no choice. Before it comes to the Qadi, we try to prevent it as much as possible. So we try as a community not to take these things to the Qadi. But if someone is brought to the Qadi and it's established the proofs, then the Qadi has no choice but to implement the had of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not an optional thing, So this man, this slave had the hand cut, and then when he was departing away from Sayyidina Ali, he came across Salman al-Farisi and Ibn al-Kira. And Ibn al-Kira said to him, who cut your hand? And the slave told him, Amir al-Mu'mineen. Amir al-Mu'mineen wa ya'sub al-Muslimin wa khatan al-Rasuli wa zawj al-Batuli. He said, the commander of the believers, the chief of the Muslims, the son-in-law of the Prophet ﷺ, and the husband of Fatima. So gave him all of his titles. In other words, he was sort of like magnifying him, respecting him, giving all of the titles of Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu. فَقَالَ قَطَعَ يَدَكَ وَتَحْمِدُ. So Ibn al-Kira said to him, look, he's just cut your hand and you're still praising him. You're still praising him. فَقَالَ وَلِمَا لَا أَمْدَحُهُ وَقَدْ قَطَعَ يَدِي بِحَقٍّ وَخَلَّسَنِي مِنَ النَّارِ. He said, why should I not praise him? He has cut my hand for a rightful reason. And by doing that, he has saved me from the hellfire. Because obviously when you have the had punishment in this world, that sin is then forgiven completely. The sin for which you have the had is completely recompensed. So there's no further punishment for that sin in the hereafter. So that's why a lot of the had punishments were given through confessions, especially for zina, because it's practically impossible to prove a case of zina, because you have to have 4 witnesses that have seen the actual act taking place, which is practically impossible, because for obvious reasons. So most of the occasions where you see the punishment was given for zina, either the stoning or the lashes, is due to confession, because the person has made tawbah and they're so fearful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what punishment they may have, they want to have it now, so they don't have it in the hereafter. So that's why he said, he saved me from the fire, he saved me from punishment in the future, in other words. فَسَمِعَ سَلْمَانَ ذَلِكَ فَأَخْبَرَ بِهِ عَلِيًّا. Salman was listening to all of this, quite in amazement at, mashallah, what a person this is. And later on when he met Ali, he told Ali what the slave had said, about him. فَدَعَ الْأَسْوَدِ وَوَضَعَ يَدَهُ عَلَى صَاعِدِهِ. Sayyidina Ali called for the slave. He called for him and he put his hand upon the stump where the hand had been chopped off. وَغَتَّاهُ بِمِنْدِيلٍ. And he covered it with a cloth. وَدَعَا بِدَعَوَاتٍ. And he started making a lot of dua for him. Making lots of dua for him. فَسَمِعْنَا صَوْتًا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ. And the narrator of this particular story said, we heard a voice coming from the heaven. إِرْفَعَ الرِّدَاءَ عَنِ الْيَدِ. The voice said, remove the cloth from the garment from the hand. فَرَفَعْنَاهُ فَإِذَا الْيَدْ قَدْ بُرِئَتْ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. So they removed and they found that the hand had completely healed itself by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَجَمِيلِ صُنْعِهِ. So see how Muslims, they always attribute it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah, whenever anything happens, Muslims, we always attribute it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because this is where previous ummah have gone astray. You know, when Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, he brought back the dead to life, and he gave, you know, he cured those who were blind and lepers. But then his followers, they start attributing it to him, not to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, but it says in the Quran about Sayyidina Isa, وَأُبْرِهُ الْأَكْمَهَ وَالْأَبْرَصَ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. I will cure the blind and the leper with the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَأُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. And I will bring back the dead to life by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Sayyidina Isa, he attributed it back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but then this was lost, you know, in succeeding generations. So you can see here, whenever he mentions, you know, the narrators always say, this thing happened bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. We don't attribute it back to those people. It's due to the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. أما سائر الصحابة فأحوالهم في هذا الباب كثيرة. So it says, as for the other Sahaba, he said there are many narrations of this, you know, of miracles from other Sahaba. If you look at books like Hayatul Sahaba, you know, Hayatul Sahaba is a good book which brings together many from many disparate sources, stories of Sahaba and so on. I think he's actually got a chapter in there, Karamat of the Sahaba, where he gives many of those narrations of other Sahaba as well. فنذكر منها شيئا قليلا. He said we will just mention a few small of sample of those. الأول روى محمد بن المنكدر عن سفينة مولى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. So this is narrated from Safina, who was the freed slave of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. قال ركبت البحر فانكسرت سفينتي التي كنت فيها وركبت لوحا من ألواحها. Once Safina, his name was Safina as well, but he was on a Safina, a boat. He was once, you know, in the sea, on a ship or a boat or something. And he said we had a shipwreck, you know, the ship was wrecked. I managed to survive by clinging onto a wood, you know, some wood. فطرحني اللوح في خيسة فيها أسد فخرج الأسد إلي يريدني. I was eventually landed upon a place on a shore, and there was a lion there, and the lion started coming towards me to attack me. فقلت يا أبا الحرث أنا مولى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. He said to the lion that was coming towards him to attack him, I am the freed slave of the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم. He said فَتَقَدَّمَ وَدَلَّنِي عَلَى الطَّرِيقِ. So the lion came towards him and then indicated him the way that he needs to go to find the road. ثُمَّ هَمْهَمَ فَظَنَنْتُ أَنَّهُ يُوَدِّعُنِي. And then after he had indicated to me the way I need to go, I heard him sort of growling behind me as if he was saying goodbye to me. Subhanallah. وَرَجَعَ, and then he went off. الثاني روى ثابت عن أنس أن أسيد ابن حضير ورجلا آخر من الأنصار تحدثا عند رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم في حاجة لهما حتى ذهب من الليل زمان ثم خرج من عنده وكانت الليلة شديدة الظلمة. It's narrated that Usayd ibn Hudayr and another Sahabi from the Ansar, they were once speaking to the Prophet ﷺ, according to some affair they had concern of theirs, until quite a portion of the night had passed. So when they left, it was a very dark night. It wasn't one of those nights where there's a moon, full moon or anything. It was a very dark night. Yeah. وفي يد كل واحد منهما عصا فأضاءت عصا أحدهما لهما حتى مشيا. I think this is the one that's narrated in Al-Bukhari, this hadith. So when the two of them left the Prophet ﷺ and they're walking, it was extremely dark. Each of them had a stick, asa. And the narrator said we saw a light, shining from the top of the stick to illuminate the path for both of them from one of their sticks. حتى مشي في ضوئهما فلما افترقا. And then, so they were walking together, and then when each of them departed, each of them had an individual light for, to illuminate the path for them. فلما انفرق بينهما طريق أضاءت للآخر عصاه فمشى في ضوئها حتى بلغ منزلا. So, that was obviously a miraculous, thing that was just lighting the path for them. And also, the fada'il of asa, having a stick. The fada'il of having a stick. It's good to get everyone to have a stick for the sunnah. Even if you don't really want to walk around with it, you should have one, in your home or something, so you have one. So you're fulfilling the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And, many prophets as well. Like Musa alayhi salam, we know he had an asa. Ibrahim alayhi salam. So, and when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to Musa alayhi salam, what is that? Tilka bi yaminik ya Musa, what's that in your right hand? And he said, this is my stick. I lean upon it. I can use it for many other uses. So the stick is a very useful item. Yeah. It's good to walk around with one if you can. Yeah. If you get attacked by a dog or anything, you can beat them off. Lean on it if you're tired. All sorts of things. Use it as sutra. This is good sunnah, inshallah, to revive if we can. Inshallah, may Allah give us tawfiq. الثالث قالوا لخالد بن الوليد إن في عسكرك من يشرب الخمر. The third one, the third incident he's going to narrate is with Khalid ibn al-Walid. Yeah? One day Khalid ibn al-Walid was told that in your army there is someone who is drinking khamar, alcohol. فَرَكِبَ فَرَسَهُ لَيْلَةً فَطَافَ بِالْأَسْكَرِ. So that night he went on his horse and he was roaming around, sort of anonymously to see what's going on. فَلَقِيَ رَجُلًا عَلَى فَرَسِهِ وَمَعَهُ زِقُّ خَمَرٍ. He came across a man who was also upon a horse, and in his hand or with him he had a container with alcohol in it, wine. فقال ما هذا. Khalid ibn al-Walid said to him, what is this? وقال خل. He said, it's vinegar. He said, it's vinegar. فقال خالد اللهم اجعله خلا. Khalid said, oh Allah, make it vinegar. Make it vinegar. فذهب الرجل إلى أصحابه فقال أتيتكم بخمر ما شرب العرب مثلها. So this man then went to his companions who he was going to be drinking with, and he told them, I've bought you some wine, amazing wine that none of the Arabs have ever tasted anything like it. فلما فتحوا فإذا هو خل. And they opened it and it was vinegar. فقالوا والله ما جئتنا إلا بخل. They said, Wallahi, you just bought vinegar. And he said, هذا والله دعاء خالد بن الوليد. This is the dua of Khalid ibn al-Walid. He realized. I don't know what to say. الرابع الواقعة المشهورة وهي أن خالد بن الوليد أكل كفا من السم على اسم الله وما ضره. And he says the famous incident, and so he doesn't sort of give the whole thing but just indicates which one, assuming that people know about it. is when Khalid ibn al-Walid, once he was making that dua of the Prophet ﷺ, Bismillah alladhi la yadurru ma'asmihi shay'un fil ardi wa la fis sama'i wa huwa as-sami'ul alim. It's recommended to make that dua 3 times after Fajr, 3 times after Maghrib, and inshallah nothing will harm you throughout the day. And the dua means, in the name of Allah, with whose name nothing can harm you in the heavens or the earth. وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ, and He's the hearing and the knowing. One of the non-believers overheard him making this dua and challenged him and said to him, if you truly believe in that, then eat this poison. If you truly believe nothing will harm you, if you take the name of Allah, then eat this poison. And Sayyidina Khalid ibn al-Walid, he made that dua and he ate the poison. He made the dua and he ate the poison. And he says this is like a very famous incident and it didn't harm him at all. Not something I would necessarily recommend you to try. Unless you have that iman of Sayyidina Khalid ibn al-Walid radiyallahu anhu. والخامس روي أن ابن عمر كان في بعض أسفاره فلقي جماعة. The fifth incident is from Ibn Umar radiyallahu anhu. You probably heard me mention this before as well. Once Ibn Umar radiyallahu anhu was walking along and he came across a whole load of people that seemed to be very panic stricken and were not, unable to go down the road where they wanted to go. He asked them, what's the problem, what's going on, and they said there's like a wild lion further down the road and people are scared, to go down there. And he walked up, took the lion by the ear and escorted it off the road, so then people could pass by. So, and then he said, إِنَّمَا يُسَلِّطُ عَلَى ابْنِ آدَمَ مَا يَخَافُهُ وَلَوْ أَنَّهُمْ لَمْ يَخَافْ غَيْرَ اللَّهِ لَمَا سُلِّطَ عَلَيْهِ شَيْءٍ. And then Ibn Umar said to them, only that which people fear is given power over them. Only that thing which people fear is given power over them. And if they feared none but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, nothing would have power over them. So that's, someone who is like living the reality of La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Someone at that time, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah is just a reality for him. So when he sees this lion, he does see absolute no power in that lion. But he sees only the power is in the hand of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That lion cannot move without the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That lion cannot touch you, without the power and the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being there in that movement of the lion. So that's not knowing it, but that is having the reality of it. Having the reality of it. Not just the knowledge of it. السادس روي أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بعث العلاء بن الحضرمي في غزاة فحال بينه وبين المطلوب قطعة من البحر فدعا بسم الله العظم ومشوا على الماء. It's narrated from that the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم sent out Al-Ala ibn al-Hadrami in one of the ghazwas, like a battle, and across, where they needed to go, they came across some large expanse of water, like a bahar, and he asked Allah by His greatest name and he walked across the water. وفي كتب الصوفية من هذا الباب روايات متجاوزة عن الحد والحصر فمن أرادها طالعها. So it says in the books of the Sufiya, you will find narrations of miracles that are without limit. So many narrations are there about miracles that took place, and whoever wants can look into those books. So remember, as as Imam al-Tahawi says in his Aqidah, we believe in the miracles of the awliya that have come to us through a reliable sanad. That have come to us through a reliable isnad. So the person who witnesses is trustworthy and reliable, and the people who have narrated through the chain should be, and then we have no reason to doubt them. Yeah? We have no reason to doubt it. Mm-hmm. Well, the thing is, I mean, I guess, like I said, you have to look at the trustworthiness of the narrators, isn't it? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of stories that go around. I will take them with a pinch of salt, you know. Won't really take them too seriously. Most of the stories that you hear nowadays. Um, in this time, the awliya are hidden as well, you know. Um, I've heard so many stories through my time as well, you know, about different sheikhs and things. Um, you know, it's just they're just stories, you know. Who knows where they've come from, you know. Um, so and plus, it doesn't really mean much anyway, you know. Whether the person did that thing or not doesn't really prove much anyway. It doesn't really prove that you're a righteous person if even if you have done some of these things have happened to you. Because don't forget, you've got things like istidraj, you know, things like that. So that's not really a proof, you know. Like one of the people of Allah used to say, al-istiqama, al-karama huwa al-istiqama. You know, the true karama is istiqama. When you see someone who is steadfast upon the deen, you know, and they've established for years and years on that practice, that's a karama, you know. There are things. I mean, there was one brother I knew, which is definitely true. His child, his baby, was severely ill, crying all the time. You know, this went on for I think weeks or something. This is quite a long time ago. He told me now, but they went to all doctors, everything. They couldn't find what's wrong with the child, and eventually he went to a particular sheikh. And the sheikh made quite a very sort of special dua, like, you know, the sheikh said, look, wait here, and he went up and he done a lot of dhikr, and I think he blew into the water, and then he gave it to the child. He said straight immediately, you know, the child was cured, completely better, you know. So these things definitely happen, you know, and you know, there's nothing wrong with that. But most of 99% of stuff you'll hear is just not true, probably, from my experience. Yeah. Um, Say again, sorry. Yeah. If someone says that they've seen the Prophet ﷺ in a waking state, you mean, while they were awake? Yeah. Well, But yeah, I mean the thing is with seeing the Prophet ﷺ while you're awake, it's been narrated by many people that they've experienced this. And they're reliable people, reliable as far as I know, they're reliable narrations, so there's no need to doubt that, you know, that can happen. Obviously, we know you can see the Prophet ﷺ in dreams, but to see him when you're awake, many people have also narrated that. So I don't see any reason why there should be any problem with that. The content with what the Prophet ﷺ says, that is limited to the person who experienced the event. That really can't really transfer to others, if you see what I mean. It's like a dream. If you have a dream of the Prophet ﷺ and he told you something, you know, do this or do that, or you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, that is restricted to yourself, the meaning of that, or because for you that's like a command, because we know that shaitan can't take the form of the Prophet ﷺ, so for you, you have to act upon that. But that you can't, it doesn't go to other people. In other words, it's not a proof for fiqh or hukm. It's not considered a valid proof, you know. As far as Aqidah goes, it's not really an issue of Aqidah. It's not an issue of like you have to believe that you can see the Prophet ﷺ when you're awake. If some people said no, it's not possible, for example, say some people said no, it's not possible to see the Prophet ﷺ while awake in this world, that wouldn't be considered an Aqidah issue. That wouldn't be considered that, oh, now they're not Ahl Sunnah or, you know, anything like that. It's not of that type of belief, if you see what I mean. Does that make sense? Or? Yeah. It's something that is possible. Well, I believe it's possible, and Shuyukh that I've studied with definitely believe it's possible. But it's not something that every Muslim has to believe in, if you see what I mean. You know, it's not something like we were mentioning earlier that's established by mutawatir. Although you may argue that so many great people have mentioned it in different books that perhaps it is a type of mutawatir. You know what I mean? It's like karamat. Karamat have been mentioned by so many thousands of people, you know, that they've witnessed these things from sheikhs, that you could say this is like mutawatir really. There's not really any doubt in it that it can happen. Yeah, I think it's time for Maghrib now, I think, isn't it? 9:28, yeah, inshallah. Any other questions on that? جزا الله عنا سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ما هو أهله. جزا الله عنا سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ما هو أهله. جزا الله عنا سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ما هو أهله. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين الحمد لله رب العالمين.